You are all welcome to Racial Parity in Engineering, the stories behind the statistics. This event is hosted by the Royal Academy of Engineering and by the Association for Black and Minority Ethnic Engineers. I'm Ollie Falayan, co-founder of the Association for Black and Minority Ethnic Engineers. I'm a process engineer and I work in the oil and gas industry here in Aberdeen. And I'm also the chair of the Scottish arm of AFBE-UK. Before I go any further, I'd like to just inform you of a couple of things. The main panel discussion we'll be having today will be recorded, but the breakout rooms will not be. So I'd just like to warn you, if there's anyone you've really wanted to say something not so nice about, just wait until the breakout sessions. You might just want to make sure that they're not there with you, just saying. Anyway, we'd like to encourage you to let others know about what's going on by continuing to post on social media. And the hashtag for today is stories behind the stats. So hashtag stories behind the chat. Please use your chat to register your questions and your reflections. Now, you and I are living at a time of a social revolution. It's a revolution that's powered by social media. And in many ways, 2020 has just put rocket boosters on this and is amplifying voices all over the world. So we're not just here because it's Black History Month. We're here because this year feels different. This year, the world witnessed a Black man have a policeman's knee on his neck for 8 minutes, 46 seconds. And because of that, it has brought this issue of race and ethnicity, which has sometimes been in the periphery of the discussions around diversity, has brought it to the center. We've had so many protests held. Black squares have been posted. Companies have, for the first time that I can remember, really started to speak honestly about this. For those who can remember a time when talking about race and ethnicity was like it was competing for a conversation, it was competing with bad breath for what could be a conversation killer. For those who remember it, it's easy to be a bit skeptical because we have, after all, been here before. But the truth is, something about this time feels different. And that's reflected in the words of the late Congressman John Lewis. Before he died, he was asked the question. He had been a man who walked with Martin Luther King on the Selma Bridge. And he was asked the question, does this feel different? And the question and the point that he raised was that what he could notice was a strong sense of allyship this time that was different. It seems like the world is starting to get the message of Ubuntu. I am because we are. ITV did a session just a few months ago, which was commemorating 27 years after the death of Stephen Lawrence. And the question they were asking is this: 27 years since the death of Stephen Lawrence, has Britain changed? Now, as part of that program, they also put together a nationwide survey, an extensive survey, in which they asked the various questions of the of many for many parts of the country. One of the findings that came out very strongly was the idea that 2 out of every 3 people of BME origin in the UK believe that racism is rife in the UK. Now, that came as a shock depending on your general background. So on the panel, you had Black people and you have white people. The Black people were saddened by that, but unsurprised. The white people were completely gobsmacked. And it just reminds me of many conversations that we've had around this issue of race and ethnicity. It's what I refer to as the is it, isn't it conversation. In order for us to really understand it, because we're often looking out for different indicators when we talk about racism, but in order for us to really understand it, we need to listen. We need to listen to the stories behind the statistics that we hear. And that is why we are really grateful that we have so many people here joining us today. We're especially grateful that we have someone who we consider to be a real ally on this journey. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome the CEO of the Royal Academy of Engineering, Dr. Hayatin Salem. Dr. Hayatin, you're welcome.
Thanks so much, Ollie. I'm absolutely delighted to have the opportunity to speak at this evening's event on a topic that is of deep importance to me personally and professionally. At the Royal Academy of Engineering, our overarching goal is to harness the power of engineering to build a sustainable society and an inclusive economy that works for everyone. Now, that's a big, ambitious goal, and it's one that we're only going to achieve through working in partnership to foster an outstanding and truly inclusive workforce. To do that, we need to increase both the numbers and the diversity of those choosing engineering careers. And it's not going to be news to anyone watching today that the UK currently has an unacceptable and persistent diversity deficit. We also know that improving diversity is necessary but not sufficient, and that's where inclusion comes in. This means creating cultures in which engineers from all backgrounds, from all parts of society, feel that they are welcome, they are valued, they're able to contribute they're able to contribute to the full and perform at their best. Cultures where no one experiences differential treatment, prejudice, or discrimination based on, for example, their ethnicity or race. Engineers play a hugely important role in shaping the world we live in, designing and delivering products, services, infrastructure that we all rely on. Accelerating progress on diversity and inclusion will bring benefits to both the profession and to society, from greater creativity and productivity to better awareness of risk and health and safety, and products better designed to serve the needs of our rich and diverse world. This evening's event is part of our programme to mark Black History Month, which of course has additional resonance this year. It's probably a gross understatement to say that 2020 has so far been an exceptionally challenging year. Living through COVID-19 has tested us all, and it has exposed some of the gaping inequalities that exist in societies around the world, including the UK. For many, the events surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement have been and continue to be very painful, but they have also forced us to confront something that is profoundly wrong in our society, that your experience of the world can be shaped to such an extent by the colour of your skin. The largest part of my family comes from South Africa, and through their experience, I've seen the devastating impact of living under a racist regime, a regime which by law required you to be racist. My first visit to South Africa at the age of 11 left me deeply shocked, but actually I think it shocks me even more that after all these years, and in a country like the UK, disparities still exist to such an extent based on race or skin colour or ethnicity. And these are issues for engineering as much as any other profession. The Academy was founded in 1976, the same year that the Commission for Racial Equality was established, and only a few years after the introduction of the very first legislation in the UK to address racial discrimination, the Race Relations Act. Racism becomes institutionalised when society fails to hold companies and other institutions to account for their actions. And sadly, many of the effects of institutional racism can still be felt today. The challenge is significant, and the events of this past year show us that there is still much to do. It's a challenge that we commit to playing our part in tackling at the Academy, through both striving to raise our own performance and working in partnership and in support of colleagues across the wider engineering profession. So let's drill down into some of the stats that frame tonight's discussion. They come from a variety of sources, so they're not all directly comparable, but they paint a pretty clear picture. Only 9% of engineers in the UK are Black, Asian, or from minority ethnic backgrounds, despite 27% of first degree qualifiers in engineering being from these groups. In 2018-19, 84% of white engineering students achieved a first or an upper second class degree, compared with 66% of Black students. Black engineering graduates are more than twice as likely to be unemployed 6 months post-graduation than their white counterparts. And for those in full-time employment 6 months after graduating, Black engineering graduates earn on average around £1,300 less than their white counterparts. And for those that do make it into engineering roles, our research has shown that they experience the workplace differently, reporting that assumptions are more likely to be made about them based on their ethnicity or race, and that they are less likely to speak up about inappropriate behaviour in the workplace when compared to white counterparts. The Academy is absolutely committed to ensuring that within engineering, racism and prejudice do not determine people's experience in the workplace or their chances of entering or progressing within their career. We are committed to working with partners across our community to create a profession which is truly open to all, where we embrace and celebrate diversity, and where your chances of success are not determined by the colour of your skin, or for that matter, any other personal characteristic unrelated to your talent and your passion for engineering. We have a range of ways in which we're taking action. Our Graduate Engineering Engagement Programme aims to improve the transition of diverse talent into engineering roles. And of the 800 students who have participated in the programme to date, over 90% are Black, Asian, or from minority ethnic groups. Through our Diversity and Inclusion Leadership Group, we are also working with engineering employers to share best practice and co-create practical tools to promote inclusion in the workplace, including for Black, Asian, and minority ethnic engineers. Other aspects of our diversity and inclusion programmes are targeted at supporting professional engineering bodies and addressing our internal performance, which includes our grant-making activity and our fellowship processes. These activities and our wider response have been developed in partnership with others with relevant expertise and experience. And in particular, we have hugely benefited from our long-standing relationship with the Association for Black and Minority Ethnic Engineers, AFBE-UK, who have led the way in raising awareness and catalysing action on this issue within the engineering community. We're really proud to be delivering this evening's event with them. And I would like to give a special shout out to the forces of nature that are Ollie and Nike Falayan. I think that what they have done over the last decade to tackle the underrepresentation and differential treatment of Black and minority ethnic engineers is awesome. They inspire me. And talking of inspiration, we have also recently launched the Hamilton Commission. Lewis Hamilton became an honorary fellow of the Academy last year in recognition of his role in inspiring interest in engineering among people from all walks of life. And we were delighted to be asked to partner with him in establishing the Hamilton Commission to improve the representation of Black people in UK motorsport. I was very honoured, once I got over the shock, to be asked to co-chair with Lewis our wonderful board of commissioners who bring a real wealth of experience, expertise and commitment to tackling racial injustice. This is a unique opportunity to drive transformational change on this crucial issue, and in the process, to learn more about how we can enrich diversity in other parts of engineering and society. The Hamilton Commission will undertake a range of activities to inform the research findings. These activities will include data analysis, stakeholder mapping, a literature review, as well as in-depth surveying and analysis with youth focus groups and key stakeholders. And we'll explore areas including the lack of role models and career services in schools, and barriers that prevent people from more diverse backgrounds joining the motorsport industry. This work will only examine challenges around STEM careers in the motorsport industry in the UK, but we hope that where possible, that the recommendations and actions from the research will be relevant internationally and to other industries. Shining a light on data, as we're doing through the Hamilton Commission, can be a powerful tool to drive change, and we as an academy seek to hold ourselves to account too. We're already publishing data and information about our actions to advance all aspects of diversity on our website, and we'll soon be publishing a report on the diversity data relating to our fellowship, awardees, events and staff as part of our efforts to maximise transparency. Based on the available data, the Academy Fellowship comprises 6.5% Black, Asian and minority ethnic engineers, and we want to change that to better reflect the engineering profession. We've recently set ourselves the target to elect half of all new fellows from groups currently underrepresented in the fellowship. This is one of several measures we're introducing to shape a fellowship that is fit for the future by the time we celebrate our 50th anniversary in 2026. And for us, a fellowship that is fit for the future is a fellowship that embodies the full breadth and diversity of engineering excellence. And we will continue to look for ways to create greater impact and accelerate the rate of change. During Black History Month, we've been highlighting the contribution of and challenges faced by Black, Asian and minority ethnic engineers, sharing tools and resources to help create more inclusive workplaces, and listening to the experiences of our Black colleagues, as we will be doing tonight. I am grateful that so many of you have joined this evening's event. Thank you for engaging with us on this vital issue. It's more important than ever that we all contribute to make engineering a more representative and a more inclusive community, from calling out behaviours that go against that, including the so-called microaggressions that make Black colleagues or people from other minorities feel less welcome or valued, or just worn down by the effort of having to explain something yet again to educate the rest of us, to systematically dismantling the barriers that still prevent people who are Black or from minority ethnic groups from accessing and enjoying rewarding careers in engineering. It all makes a difference, so thank you for your support.
Thank you. And with that powerful speech and powerful response, would like to thank you for that. That's been really inspiring. And we're only just getting started, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Ollie.
So that was an amazing summary, I believe, of exactly where we are. Just before I introduce our distinguished panel, I'd like to just say a few things. Just picking up on exactly what Dr. Hayatin was just talking about there, about the difficulties talking about race and ethnicity. I believe that one of the problems that we face is that we're often looking out for different indicators. And very often it is sometimes baffling to people who see the reaction from people within the BAME communities to perceived acts of bias or racism. It can sometimes be baffling. And I think that's because sometimes there is a misunderstanding of the nature of racism. Racism, as I define, is discrimination in a place of societal or organizational privilege or power. It operates like a virus that mutates into socially acceptable forms, often leaving the parent alive. So the parent never dies off. And we see that in the history of racism. If I was to do a poll here and ask people, how long do you think racism has existed? I think there are a lot of people here who would assume that racism is something that has always been around. But in reality, it is something like 500 years old. The issue or the root of modern racism comes from the proto-racial concept of the purity of blood that was articulated after the Reconquista in Spain as a way of distinguishing between real Christians and the Marranos and Moriscos of Spain. About the same time, the European settlers settling in the Americas also took that concept with them. And so the questions they would ask whilst they were carrying out a real decimation of the Native American population there was, do they have souls? So it started off as a religious form of racism. By the time the Dominican monk Bartolomé de las Casas was talking to these European leaders, encouraging them to stop their near decimation of the North American, the Indian tribes, and urging them instead to look to Africa as a way of making up the shortfall. By that point, ideas around the beastly and inferior intellectual inferiority of people from Africa had already permeated different areas. Also happened because the Enlightenment happened and religion was no longer the distinguishing line between people. It would be another 300 and 400 years. It was a philosophy that came in handy and justified the transatlantic slave trade. It would be another 300 to 400 years before the world would get to hear a strong challenge to the idea of slavery by the abolitionist movement. It'll be yet another 110 years before the world would get to see the horror of this idea of purity of blood, this biological racism that had mutated from religious racism in the Holocaust. The 60s, 70s, and 80s saw a spate of changes, social changes, civil rights campaigns, increased rights for people that eventually meant that certain things were no longer socially acceptable. And at this point, what started off as religious racism mutated into biological racism, mutated into modern or cultural racism. That was less about superior biology and more about superior cultures. The current modern racism is less overt, is more likely to be encountered when people come in touch with institutions. And this is the reason for that is that it is quite possible to live one's life completely without having to interact with people who are different from us, other than when we have to engage in those institutions. And this is why when the Nuffield Center for Social Investigation in 2019 did their review in which they sent out 3,200 fictitious applications in response to real jobs, the results showed that for anyone who was a minority, they had to send out 60% more applications than your average majority white person. It's the reason why, as somebody said, most of our organizations look like a pint of Guinness, white at the top, black at the bottom. In order for us to deal with this, we have to start to have the real conversations, and we have to listen to the experiences. We have to listen to the stories behind these statistics. So in order to do that, I'm going to welcome 4 people who I would like to be like when I grow up. The first of which is Lorraine Martin, who is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Network Rail, and done some amazing work. It's Oluwaseyi Sosonia, who is the co-founder and CEO of Gravity Sketch. I'll put it another way, he's a really clever guy. We've got Mariam Amusa, who is a production technologist at Shell and often a speaker at various events. And I've been fortunate enough to work with her for quite a few years. And we've got my brother from another mother, Alan Cameron, who is a sergeant in the Royal Air Force and a genuine champion and ally for ethnic diversity. You are all welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to start with just asking you all, I know I've said a little bit about you, but you're better at telling people who you are. So I'd like to just ask you, Lorraine, first of all, to introduce yourself.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the event. And thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Network Rail. I've been at Network Rail for 8 years, the longest I've been anywhere, including school. So I guess I must like it. And I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion.
We'll have Shay next.
Hello, my name is Oluwaseyi Sosonia, co-founder and CEO of Gravity Sketch. I'm also an enterprise fellow at the Royal Academy of Engineering. I've been in engineering since my first job, actually. After graduating college. So it's been a huge passion of mine, and now I'm an entrepreneur, which is my newfound passion. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm very surprised at how many people showed up. This is great.
Excellent. And next, Alan.
Yeah, I'm Sergeant Alan Cameron. For a long time, I was an aircraft engineer in the Royal Air Force. In the last 15 years, I specialised in radar on AWACS. But for the last few years, I've been involved in what the RAF call the Specialist Engagement Team, and we cover Scotland and Northern Ireland. So looking forward to the discussion.
Excellent. And last but not least, Mariam.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mariam Amusa, and just a slight correction, not a production technologist, a production specialist. It's just a fancy way of saying operation support engineer with some commercial sprinkles on it. So I've been with Shell for the last 9 years, turned 9 years this October, and predominantly worked on our Central Northern Sea as a process engineer, with a few broadening assignments as a commercial support. So yes, as Ollie said, it's a passion of mine working to see how we can help level the playing field as much as we can within the powers that we've got. And I'm looking forward to the panel.
Thank you, thank you. So let's get started. Lorraine, first time we had a conversation, I can remember you talking to me about your parents having what is often called the talk with you, preparing you for the world as it will be. Would you like to tell us a bit about that?
Yes, Ollie. You know, I'm a child of parents who came over during the Windrush entry. So my parents came here expecting the streets to be paved with gold, and they also wanted their kids to have the best possible education. And in preparing me for that, now I should also say I'm a Londoner. I mean, where am I really from? I really am from London. So I was born in London, Northwest London. And at the time, it was an area where there were quite a lot of immigrants. So Black communities in terms of African Caribbean communities, Turkish Cypriot communities and Irish communities. So my parents are very familiar with the no blacks, no Irish, no dogs epithets that they would meet, both in terms of housing and in terms of jobs. And so the talk really was about building resilience within myself, my brother and my sister, that as much as my parents loved me, the world would not necessarily love me, and it would probably love me less because I'm Black and I'm a woman. So it was really about preparing me to work twice as hard in order to be as successful as my white counterparts, to anticipate racist activity, to anticipate prejudice, to anticipate different types of barriers, but also to be prepared to surmount those barriers. So it really was about building my resilience and my preparedness for what would lie ahead. And I'm really, really grateful for that talk, because to be prepared is to be forearmed, is to be ready for the battle. And I think I stand on the shoulders of a number of warrior kings and queens that have enabled us to succeed. So the talk has been fundamental, and it's something I pass on to those around me.
I like the, you get the two extremes, people who want to maybe almost deny that there is an issue, and then there are those who see it everywhere. But what you said just has a certain balance about it. It almost is exactly, it reminds me exactly of my discussion with you, Shay. When we had the discussion, there are two things that Lorraine's just mentioned. She talked about working twice as hard to go half as far. That was something that you said. And you also, from our discussions, would completely agree with that quality that you said we need. So let me ask you the question. What for you has been, as somebody who grew up in the US, works in the UK, has experienced certain levels of, well, the world as we often see it, what quality would you say has been most important to you?
I definitely have to echo the resilience, and you'd be hard pressed to find anyone that hasn't had that talk. And I think one thing that we didn't, Lorraine didn't mention, is that the age in which you have this talk, right? I just remember being very aware of my complexion, and also juggling between these two worlds of white and Black. And in America, you can't choose that. You don't get to choose which side you're on. You're Black, right? Obama's a Black president. You don't get to choose this kind of thing. And so being very conscious about it from a very young age, and being conditioned to work twice as hard, literally word for word. My stepfather, he's a African-American barber. He would just always tell me, boy, you got to work twice as hard. And that was just something that it reverberated through our household amongst me and my brothers. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find any Black person, at least in my age and demographic, that hasn't heard those words from their parents verbatim. And I think it comes from this idea that this very clear understanding that the system was not developed for Black people. The system was developed for white people, and they folded Black people into the system, especially in America and as well here in the UK with the Windrush and so forth. And as such, it wasn't designed to integrate, to bring in Black people into certain areas. And so when we, as a youth, when you look around and you see your role models, you often see sports or entertainment. It's very rare that you would see someone from design or engineering backgrounds. And you know, there's not this kind of welcoming environment for that, or even this openness and eagerness to help us grow. And so you have to be resilient just as a young person getting through life to get through school and so forth. And then you have to be even further resilient to enter into a space that there are very few faces. And without those faces, you don't have the sense of welcomeness, openness. It's not the same faces that you see at the family cookout. And without that, you have this lack of familiarity, and that is very troublesome for some people. So that's where you have to kick in, maybe working twice as hard to quadruple as hard, just to maintain the sanity and maintain the fact that there aren't going to be those cultural similarities. So it's not as easy as grabbing a pint with some of your mates from high school. We have high school, so mates in high school versus college. The complexion of my class completely changed. I was the only Black person in my mechanical engineering course. So you have to really be mentally prepared for this type of thing. And through academics, and you move into career, it's the same kind of thing. And now even in entertainment, entrepreneurship, especially entrepreneurship in technology. I'm the only Black person I see in any of the events I go to. I only pitch to venture capitalists, which are white, male usually. And so there's just this lack of influence, and that's what I feel I hope that I can offer to the generation coming up. And it's going to take a long time, obviously, for it to metastasize throughout our community. But yeah, this resiliency is fundamental.
That's right. That's right. And the thing you said about being the only person, as the only Black person in, you know, whether it's your course or the space that you operate in, it's something that I've now tagged the ally test. So for anyone who genuinely, because allyship is all the rage just now, everyone's talking about it. But actually, one of the things I often say to people is, if you are going to be an ally, try putting yourself in that context where you are the minority. And listen to people talking about their experiences, and you might learn a thing about allyship. But that brings me to you, Alan. Racism can often be a sensitive subject for people to talk about. What would your advice be to anyone who wants to be a true ally?
Thanks, Ollie. Yeah, I think this question's all about empowerment. It's not necessarily just about the fear of saying the wrong thing. It's about the fear of saying anything sometimes. So people need to feel empowered to put their head above the parapet, so to speak, because those conversations are going to be difficult. But it's being comfortable with the uncomfortable, I suppose, is what you've got to look forward to as an effective ally. So people need to feel empowered to speak or act when they see something that's maybe not appropriate or something that just needs changing. So it's moving from passive to active, I think, requires that commitment to difficult conversations. And, you know, I think we all just need to realize that that's a movement from non-racist to anti-racist, where you do something active. And that's what will make a bigger difference to change as we go along. Now, we need to incorporate that into education in our organizations. Some of those things, partnerships. So the partnership that we have with through the Air Force to the Association for BME Engineers, for instance, or the other partnerships we have with the Royal Academy of Engineering, they help, and they help to give people the confidence to be able to challenge and speak up. But we need to support allies as much as anything else, because if we don't support them, they don't feel empowered to actually challenge. We need to grow the networks, and some of those networks can support each other. I would also say, when we do something, we need to check whether it's been successful or not. You know, it's a waste of time just doing something and then not checking if anything has actually changed, because you know, as engineers, we'll all be familiar with feedback loops. We need to do that feedback loop. Find out if what we've done has had any effect, and if it hasn't, either tweak it or maybe move on and change and do something different. The most powerful thing that was the answer to me to what can an ally do from somebody in a minority group was really speak up for me when I'm not in the room, and that really hit home for me. But actually, I think you can take that a step further. I think you could take it to speak up for me when I am in the room, because otherwise it's always me that has to challenge. So even when I'm in the room, speak up. So it's the speaking up that we need to empower within everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Alan. And Miriam, you had an experience recently that you would have liked people to speak up in the room as a Muslim Black female engineer working within the oil and gas industry. What sorts of, and I know it's a word you don't like, microaggressions have you come across?
Thanks for the question, Ollie. So yes, like you said, I don't like the word microaggression because I feel that it trivializes the said behavior or aggression, which takes the power away from the person that has been the victim of this said behavior and excuses the person that has actually dealt out the said behavior. So I would say we should just call it what it is. It's a bias, it's a behavior, it's aggression. Putting the micro before it is, I feel it's a bit redundant. But yeah, across the industry, across companies, even well-meaning people will still somehow met out this type of aggressions. Bringing to the topic you explained. So from just being in a room, having discussions, engineering questions, giving your solutions and not being heard. I mean, it's hard. You're already only the one in the many. So not also adding the fact that you don't get seen, even when it's almost like you're sticking out. You could, even if you try to blend it, you can't. But just when it comes to your ideas, either someone else repeats it and it's like, oh, wow, light bulb moment. And you're just there thinking, I literally said that. Am I in an alternate universe? But more recently, where that whole allyship, as Al mentioned, comes in is we were at a conference where I was helping facilitate. And there was a coffee break where different people in different rooms come and have coffee before going back in. And I was having a conversation with someone quite senior. And then someone else came in who obviously doesn't know me, came up and said, oh yeah, can you let me know when the coffee comes around? And I was just like, it actually took me a while to understand what was going on. So again, I was the only one in the room that looked like me, and I'm used to that. But what struck me was the fact that for some reason, it circled across 20 people all talking together, and they just realized that me being the only odd one out, then definitely I must be the one serving the coffee. And it even took me a while to realize that. I actually was trying to describe where the reception is, and they go, oh no, can you go get it? And I was just like, actually I can't because I don't know when it's coming, but you can go ask. And it was an uncomfortable position to be in, not just because of answering that back, but the fact that it was pin drop silence. Nobody commented, even the person I was speaking right with. And it was just uncomfortable. It brought out my like self-doubt and like, imposter syndrome. Like maybe I'm actually not even supposed to be in this kind of settings. But yeah, so I think those kind of aggression behaviors are aggression. You can say it might be intentional or not intentional, but the fact is the person that's feeling that feels that. And that means you don't bring your whole self to work. You're having your self-doubt, which means you're not bringing your best self to do the job that you're supposed to do. So I think we need to address that inclusion piece and the bias before we look at getting more people into the funnel, because they will just come out the way they came in.
Wow, that's powerful. And people often overlook the sort of dark places that repeated experiences like that can take you. There are a lot of people, and I'll stay with you, Miriam. There are lots of people who are saying the right things. Lots of black squares posted, lots of the right hashtags. Everyone's saying the right stuff. Everyone's sounding so woke at the moment. But how optimistic are you about where things are going? Does anything feel different about this time, where you think that some of the issues that we really worry about may actually change? So this for you, Miriam.
Yes, thank you, Ollie. I think I would say I'm optimistic, just because I'm an optimistic person anyways. But I think it's still too soon to tell. The movement is still there, it's still quite fresh, it's still quite new, and everyone is a bit more aware of where we are now. But I think just as Dr. Hayatin mentioned earlier, it needs, and Al as well, it needs to be something that we can test in 6 months' time, in a year's time. where are we from where we set out from George Floyd's incident to now? Like, it shouldn't be just something that we talk about is the next fab thing. We put a 10-point plan in different companies of what we're going to do to tackle it. And then that's it. It goes in the drawer and it ends. It's something that needs to be felt by the same said employees that feel that they're not given the same opportunities. If you come back in a year, what are they saying? Are they seeing that representation coming through from the top? So I think for now, it's too soon for any company to even take any credit for what they're doing. And it's too soon as well for us waiting on the sidelines, watching to expect solutions, because it needs to be long-term and sustainable.
Yes, yes, yes. Talking about measures, Alan, one of the things you said to me some weeks ago was that the Royal Air Force is actually treating the issue of ethnic diversity. I believe you said it was like the #1 priority. How has that been working, and how's that sort of played out?
Well, I think like you both just mentioned, the first thing you have to do is make the statement that is the case. And that has to come from the top of whichever organisation you're in. So it has to come from your senior leadership. The first couple of aspects of that, I think, are relatively straightforward. Is the commitment needs to be there from the senior leadership team. And then for us in the Royal Air Force, we have a constant stream of young people coming in. Now, the younger generation tend to get this stuff much better than people of my generation and large swathes of my organisation, the Royal Air Force. So that's the challenging part there in the middle. Is that some people will call it the frozen middle. There's a bit of inertia. There's a bit of apathy sometimes. There's unconscious bias for definite. Now, most organisations are not riddled with racists, but they have got large proportions of their organisation that maybe are passive. And going back to the last question, so it's how you reach them. The RAF have got a couple of ways of doing it. We've got what we call the RAF BAME network, and they look inwards to the RAF personnel and the RAF as an organisation. And you have the teams that I work on, the specialist engagement teams, who look to engage outwards with society, because at the end of the day, our organisation, the Royal Air Force, should represent our society accurately, and it doesn't. So that's what we've done. But as was stated previously, it's a work in progress. We're nowhere near there. So we need to build links, which is what we're doing with events like this, for instance. The communication between networks. So there are natural allies for the BAME network in terms of we've got a D&I network, we've got an LGBT network. Now, there's a bit of synergy between some of those groups, and naturally they should support each other. And by getting that groundswell of support, that's when things start to really change. But again, we need the feedback loop. Is what we're doing working? And checks and balances. And let's not just carry on doing something we think sounds good. Let's check if it's working, and if it isn't, let's do something about that.
Yes, yes. Thanks, Alan. Lorraine, you've worked on quite a number of high-profile projects, including the 2012 Olympics. If I was to sort of pick a number of sort of practical things that a company can do in order to really move forward, what would those things be? So I'm thinking of things like the ethnicity pay gap, progression, recruitment. What sort of measures over the last 8 years that you've been at Network Rail have you been able to implement that maybe some other companies can look at and use as an example?
Thank you so much, Ollie, for that. I get torn because, in a sense, there isn't one thing, and I don't know that I'm
no silver bullet. Yeah.
So we've made a modicum of progress, and I think I was a bit stimulated by Alan's comment that organisations aren't racist. I kind of stimulated because if the institutions aren't racist, we would look very different. We would have better representation of Black, Asian and minority ethnic people in leadership positions, the provision, access to services, access to housing, access to opportunities would look very, very different. So I'm minded that we don't forget that the system, as Saya said, is designed in a way to create barriers. And so for institutions to respond, they need to own that premise. They need to own that their institutions create barriers. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the dearth of presence in leadership. We wouldn't have a disparity in terms of COVID impacting on Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities, and nor would we see the dearth of leadership. So we need, at the first instance, to own that there's institutional discrimination, institutional racism in our organisations, and as uncomfortable as that might feel. I think then Al said also that the point about leadership is really, really crucial. The tone, the intent, the deeds need to match. And I think historically we're really used to a lot of cognitive dissonance. So we hear one thing and we see another. And I think organisations have to be really much more rigorous, that if they are going to make commitments and they are going to introduce measures, that they hold themselves to account. And so those measures are really important, so that you're publicly stating the direction of intent. Like Dr. Hayatin said, you know, looking at 50% of the intake from diverse communities, that's fantastic. So we need to come back in 2026 and see how that's going, although I'm sure we will hear year on year how that progress happens. So your leadership needs to be clear, and you need to have a very visible narrative about why it's important to your business. Both in terms of it being the moral thing to do, but also the added value that you get from having diverse contributions in terms of creativity, in terms of innovation, in terms of reflecting the communities that you serve. All of these things, as we know, that the information indicates, the data indicates, add value to your organization. So that clear narrative is really, really important. And then leadership needs to open up I was going to say, the kind of shrouds of what becomes a leader. So open itself up, both in terms of reverse mentoring and in terms of peer-to-peer mentoring, and in terms of creating secondments that people can access to have opportunities to success. It's not about fixing the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people. So we are overqualified, underemployed, and we need to understand that. So for me, those are some of the things that organizations need to put in place. It's a marathon. The fact that we're here still, and if you're talking about my working on London 2012, that's 8 years ago now.
Yeah.
But like Mariam, I'm an optimist, and I'm an optimist because I think at this moment, it's a really pivotal time for us in terms of diversity and inclusion. And never before have we had, I think in my experience, the kind of level of debate and exchange and impetus that we're having now. So it's a good time for organizations to lean into the topic and to try something. And I think, as Dr. Hayatin said, be brave, be bold, and be resilient. You know, continue to make those changes and hold yourselves to account for the successes that you make.
Thank you, Lorraine. People sometimes expect change to be comfortable, and they expect growth to be comfortable. But there's no precedent in life for comfortable growth. It just doesn't happen. So prepare to be uncomfortable, or as someone says, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Speaking about subjects like that, Shay, I heard somebody say recently, actually it was on Netflix, somebody was saying that algorithms, and this is another area that we don't often talk about in this context, are opinions embedded in code. And in many ways, they are fast becoming the vehicle of systemic racism. So question is, how important is it to have BAME representation within that world of tech?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of situations that have come about, and there's lots of good stuff to read on the internet. Black people being listed as gorillas in image recognition software. Same with law enforcement software, because there's a smaller sample size of Black people when they're running their tests. You end up getting a lot of false kind of conclusions, and so people are ended up in situations that are very peculiar. So there's a whole lot of stuff in that is just about sample size and just the underrepresentation just on like where you're pulling your data from. but the people that are actually writing the algorithms, the people that are writing code, these are generally white people, right? And more specifically, they're white men. And as such, there's just a lack of diversity in the thought process and their team structure. So what I'd prefer to spend a bit more time on is more around like what I think is possible for us to do moving forward, especially in the technology landscape since it's so young. This isn't like a government, for example, that has hundreds of years of process, and we're trying to fold in Black people from being 3/5 of a human being for political reasons hundreds of years ago. This is something that is emerging right now. We can play an active role in shaping this. And I think it comes down to economics. It's dollars and cents. Lorraine said it very credibly just a bit earlier. Like we can look at it from a perspective of we need racial equality, and you really are resting on the leaders to make that decision of whether or not they're going to go down that route and put some structure in place for that. But if you present it in the shape of this is going to end up with us making better revenues, us making more credible products that are going to beat our competition, bring in women, bring in people of color, bring in Black faces into that discussion, into the development teams, and you're going to end up with a much better product, especially as the world economy is changing. Black folks have extreme economic power, massive economic power across the globe. Same with women and other people of color in other regions. So they're fast growing in terms of the emerging the birth rates, right? I mean, we're going to see a completely different face of the globe in a very short period of time. So if you're not doubling down on having a diverse team and diverse algorithms to service a diverse economy, your company could be seeing some very hard times in the near future. So that's what I would put out there is really think about it from an economic perspective and see where you can drive value in that way as well.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. We've got just 1 minute before we move into the breakouts. So I'm just going to put one question that came from the floor. And if I could have the quickest answer possible. Somebody has asked the question around the term unconscious bias. And there is often some people view it as something that is often used as an excuse for certain kinds of behaviors. So would anyone just like to say something about unconscious bias as briefly as possible?
I'll give it a go. So it's about the way in which our brain automatically responds to particular stimuli. So we notice race in about 150th of a millisecond. We notice gender in 100th milliseconds. And it's actually that the brain is triggered to notice difference. And that's what unconscious bias is based on. Our conscious bias, in a sense, is then the things that we deliberately do that we're very much aware of. So it's a term for the extent to which our brain responds to those stimuli which we haven't even thought about. And then they come to the fore and they're expounded on by our socialization. So if I've had a positive experience with Black people, then my conscious bias, my unconscious will lean in. If it's been negative or I've heard lots of stereotypes, I'll lean away.
Thank you. That was very expertly done in 1 minute on what is a huge topic. Well done. And we'd just like to say thank you to our panelists. That was an excellent discussion. I'm sure you'd agree that we could carry this on for at least another hour, I'm pretty sure, and everyone would still be learning from you. So thank you very much, our panelists.
Thank you, Ollie.
We now come to the next part of the event where we will try to delve into these further. We've got 4 key breakout rooms, inspired actually by the OGE-UK Diversity and Inclusion Task Force, starting out, staying on, getting on, and champions and allies. So you will be gradually, I've got some very expert people in the background who will basically take you to your breakout room. So please ask questions, please keep your contributions brief so that you can cover more people, because we've got quite a huge audience. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So that was it felt like we were able to cover quite a lot, albeit in a very, very short time. So what I'll just do now, we've only got a few more minutes. So I'd just like to ask representatives from each group to give us very, very short reflections of what was discussed. So if you just give us a few points, no longer than 30 seconds. So I'm going to get a volunteer. Can I get a volunteer from the starting out group first?
We didn't manage to pick anyone else, so I, Academy member, will report back very quickly. So basically, I mean, one of the major points which were made quite early on was actually looking at the numbers of filters and how they're applied and where they're applied actually, because before you even get to that point of looking at sort of the filters applied by some of these job or recruitment agencies, etc., quite often they're filtered based on university you came from. And a lot of those universities themselves have filters that filter a lot of students out. So actually at every stage along this pipeline, there is a lot of filters that need to be looked at. So when it comes to starting out and trying to transition into careers, that is one of the areas looked at. Also, there's a question about how early are we engaging with young people? Are we doing it when they're already teenagers? Are we doing it when they're already too late? And there was some talk about sort of how AFB are looking at, and conversations are being had in terms of reaching out to primary students a lot earlier, and trying to inspire them at those younger ages before they have made their choices and showing engineering as a cool career. Yeah, that's I think those are the two major points. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. That's an excellent point. It's 31.8% of all engineering students are from a BAME background, but the industry has just around 9%, as you said. Was there any contribution from the other starting out group very quickly? If you just highlight anything that Johannes hasn't said.
Yeah, I think it was quite similar, massively about representation and having the correct role models, etc. But yeah, I think we had some really inspirational people that are actually, you know, diverse themselves and really taking it upon themselves to seek some leadership responsibilities. A great girl called Shay doing some great work in Cambridge, and she has to jump off now to go and do a Black History Month event. And I think more of that needs to happen, and us taking, you know, AFB again, a perfect example of that. So yeah, more of that would be great.
Excellent. So diversity starts when people are very young, not just when they come into your company to apply for a job. Thanks for that, Jordan. Please remember to unmute yourself before you speak. Can we get some contributions now from the Staying On group? Just briefly unmute yourself and give us a summary. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Ollie. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Hi, Ollie. I was just going to say it was really interesting conversations with those who dialed in. I think there was experiences from people who mentioned that they found it less likely to challenge behaviors that undermine them in the workplace. And I think one of the things we sort of agreed on was it was important to ensure that education and awareness is raised in the workplace and experiences are shared. Those safe spaces are available to allow people to understand the sort of behaviors that could prevent people from actually being themselves in the workplace. Also, the importance of allyship and people calling out wrong behaviors to other people, and also finally embracing a zero tolerance policy to these behaviors, and that more companies should try and see if they can adopt that in the same way we have a code of conduct and or a safety culture in engineering.
That's excellent. Any addition to that from the other Staying On group?
Hi, Ollie. Yes, I'm the spokesperson for our group. We felt that there was a hierarchical structure in engineering, and that as engineers, we are trained and conditioned to think there's a right or wrong answer and there's a process to follow. But so we don't want to call out things that are not the norm, and point things out as basically calling them out. There was somebody from the science background that raised a point that said, you know, in science things don't always go to plan, but you should try new things out, and in that way, you know, with people who don't look like you, who come up with solutions that you wouldn't think about. And if it doesn't always go to plan, that's not always a bad thing. We also had a contribution that said, He's a person who had his own business, a black man who had his own business, who said it was really difficult for him to get business as a businessman, and he had to employ somebody else. I'm guessing somebody not looking like him, to get that business. And can the Royal Academy help in some way to kind of elevate black businesses?
Yeah, I think that's an important part of this whole discussion, that if we are going to keep people on, if we're going to really achieve diversity, we need more people to own businesses and to begin the support that they need to do so. Thank you for that, Tegwin. We'll move on swiftly to the Getting On group. Rosie.
Oh, sorry there, just trying to find my unmute button. Yeah, we had some really great discussions in our group. And it started off with actually someone sharing one of their experiences where they had issues in the workplace and they had been discounted and they hadn't been taken seriously. And obviously that had created quite a nasty environment, which isn't where we want to be. So really that kicked off our conversation about what we can do about that and how we can try and combat that and make sure that's not happening in the future, or what we could put in place to overcome that. We talked a lot about how data might help back up some of those conversations to say, look, this is an issue, because that person had experienced, and I think everyone could probably relate to that it was just discounted, or it's not a problem here, it's, our company doesn't have it, our industry doesn't have it. Actually, we felt the data would help back that up and give it sort of the robustness behind that argument. Not that it should need it, but actually it just makes it really clear cut. You can't, the data's not going to lie. It's really strong argument. We talked about the companies might be a little bit reluctant to want to do this, and that may be a hurdle, that they don't want to collect that data, they don't want to look at that data, and actually that might be a hurdle to overcome. But it would help us have that transparency, and that companies would do better, and we need to encourage companies to do better. And actually there's a bit of a business case, again, not that there should be, we should all be working like this, but actually there is a business case to work towards that. We then moved on to talking about the sort of almost practical initiatives that we could do that might help particularly, I guess, some of our younger people within the industry to progress, but also actually just sort of everybody within the industry. And some of the items we've touched on already, I guess, within the group, but was allies and making sure we had the right allies, sponsorship and mentorship, speaking up, and how actually that could often be easier for managers, as opposed to actually the person who potentially could be in a junior role. That might be much more hard for them to speak up. Outing bad behaviour, and making sure that isn't just allowed to sort of slide under the radar. We talked about having a safe space where it was open and honest, and these people could have an area which is with like-minded people that have had those shared experiences. They can realise they aren't alone, that they aren't alienated from others, I guess. They do know that they're not the only ones, and that we need to work towards a better solution. And then we finally talked a lot about kind of the talent pipeline and the support and providing a scaffolding to help that growth. And someone mentioned that actually that they had in one of their companies a one-to-one sessions with senior leaders, and that provided an environment where not only that support could probably be provided and that career management provided, but also it provides a much more intimate environment where you could raise problems or issues that maybe you might be experiencing in the workplace. So that was sort of some of the more practical initiatives that we discussed that maybe we could bring into companies to help.
Thank you, Rosie. I'm aware that we've just got 1 minute now before the end. Is there just, I would just say, a statement that you think summed up the debate from the other Getting On group very quickly before we hear from the Champions and Allies group? Anyone? Before I move on from the other Getting On group? Right, yeah. Let's go straight to Champions and Allies. So can I get a quick summary from someone from one of the Champions and Allies breakout rooms?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak on that. So one of the big themes was that one of the reasons why people aren't allies and don't step forward is fear of saying the wrong thing, embarrassment and lack of confidence. And one of our big solutions to that was consistent training. My colleague has already put on the chat FAIR Ambassadors, Fairness, Inclusion, Respect, which is a free training resource which looks fantastic.
Thanks, Bryony. Oh, that's excellent, excellent. Anything else from the other Champions and Allies group? Just if we can follow Rob's example and just keep it that brief.
Hi, it'll be just a couple of ones in terms of actions that they said to acknowledge racism and not kind of almost start from the beginning to kind of go through all the data, but just kind of acknowledge the fact that it does exist so that we can move on and learn from the gender champions and allies. So if it's already been on, you know, things have moved on for certain groupings, that we should learn from those different experiences as well. So we don't have to always reinvent the wheel. And there's really good resources around that, and the training's excellent as well.
Thanks, Artie. Best practice, and there's usually a way of doing things, and we need to start to reach out more to people who are already doing this. That sort of brings us to the end of this event. I'd like to thank you all for being part of this discussion. There are some people who have worked extremely hard over the last few months and weeks. Special thanks to Artie, to Rob, to Lucy, to Polly. It's been excellent working with you, and we've had a lot of pressure to try and get everything right, but we've been really grateful for the dedication that you've shown to this. I'd like to especially thank a lot of the leaders of ethnic minority resource groups in their company. I've been meeting with them regularly, and this was first our sort of joint brainchild, and it's been great to be able to see that materialized, and even better to have the Royal Academy of Engineering do host it. Let's keep in touch. Let's use our social media platforms to continue this discussion, because a flash in the pan is not the answer. We need to keep doing the things that will mean that when we're talking next time, we're talking about progress and not talking about the same issues. But on behalf of AFBE-UK, the Association for Black and Minority Ethnic Engineers, and the Royal Academy of Engineering, I'd like to thank you all for being part of this fantastic discussion. And yeah, all the best, everybody. Bye for now.